Hey guys, Brian here from Better Chess Training, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about developing an opening repertoire, what it is, why it's important to do so, and then how to develop it, organize it, and maintain it. Okay, to start off our discussion about developing an opening repertoire, first off, I think it's important to define what an opening repertoire is, and then we'll go more into how to develop it, how to choose it, and how to maintain it. Um, and this video is geared towards beginning players who have never really looked into that. So repertoire basically is a plan on how you're going to play the opening aspect of the game. And we've talked before on this channel about specific or general principles of the opening. Developing your pieces and controlling the center and king safety, for example. And in my videos, when I'm playing other players, I often refer to my opening repertoire. So these are the types of variations I'm comfortable with and that I play often. So basically, an opening repertoire is this plan, and um, because of that plan, you develop specific lines to play against specific responses. So let's just take a look on the board here to give you an example. If you were to, with white, you would choose, a move to start with. Now, by the way, just get this out of the way quickly. Over time, over your chess career, you will play lots of different moves, or you may want to play lots of different moves. So it's not that developing open repertoire is something that is going to tie you in for the rest of your life into, say, playing e4 or d4, but it gives you a guide, and I'll talk a little more about this in the next segment on developing your chess overall. So let's take a quick look here. For example, let's look at the white side of things. You would choose either e4, for example, and then if your opponent plays e5, you would have to decide what to play. For example, you could play knight to f3, which is probably the most popular. You can play the king's gambit with f4 and specialize in that. You could even play like the Vienna, knight to c3. And so you would pick a specific line to go through and develop, okay? So that's basically what it is. And just to give you an example from uh, the other side of the board, let me just flip the board here. If your opponent plays e4, you want to decide what your main defense is going to be. And again, over time, you can change this as your skills change or your preferences develop. But and you've seen me on this video. I often play the French defense with d4. I'm sorry, e4, e6, d4, and then d5. And there's further choices down the line. So basically, that's what a repertoire is. Well, let me do a couple more quick examples. And then for d4, you would also have your defense that you would learn and develop. And then for moves like knight to f3 or c4, you would do the same thing. So an opening repertoire is a plan on how you're going to respond to different moves that your opponent is going to make. So let's talk next about why you want to develop an opening repertoire. So why do you want to develop an opening repertoire? There's a few reasons, and I'll just go through them fairly simply. First off, when you develop an opening repertoire, the beginning of your chess games are more comfortable because you are playing systems or moves or plans that you have seen before and that you've studied. As much as chess is a problem-solving game, that you're eventually going to be playing positions that you have never seen before, having some context based on pawn structures, based on piece placements, opening lines that you've played before can help you with the process, help you to find the right ideas. So having an opening repertoire helps in that sense. I've run into players who like to play lots of different types of openings. And again, as I mentioned, over time you will play different openings, so don't feel like you're locked into one choice right away. But the issue there is that I think it might stunt their or hinder their progress. And that brings me to the next point: is that studying an opening repertoire isn't just about the opening lines; it's about learning about the middle game, learning about strategy. This is a position from one of my recent games on the Internet Chess Club during the 45 League, and some of you may recognize it as the Catalan Opening. And I've played this quite a bit against I played this quite a bit from the black side, and the point here is that um, if people see, if you look at these three pawns may look intimidating, but the idea, though, in my opening now, in some cases, it is good to take on e4, for example, and in but with the opening repertoire that I am developing or that I've studied, I don't do that. And in this case, with this next move, and I'm just going to show you just a few moves to kind of get the idea here, is that understanding where to how to capture back is partly something that maybe you could figure out over the board, and it is context. But if you have a general idea, in this case, for example, in the Queen's Gambit decline, in a lot of lines, you take back with the e pawn in order to get counterplay down the half open file. But because my bishop is here on b7, I have this pawn here on c6, taking back with the e pawn, for example, can create a big weakness here on c6 and make it a little difficult. And then at some point, if I were to advance this pawn, now this pawn could become very weak. Now, again, there are some lines where that is the case, so you have to look at your specific line. And again, right now we're mainly focusing on the concept of using your opening repertoire to learn chess. But instead, um, I take back with the c pawn here. And the reason why is that I will get this open C file, for example, and some people might say, well, he can advance E5, which I believe is what he did. Yes, what he did during the game. But because I've studied this opening, I realize that my part of my counterplay will be eventually, after I move my knight, will be eventually to advance um, this pawn here to F6 to break up these pawns. So he has a temporary space advantage, but because I understand what's going to happen in this opening, I can plan ahead for that because and also the experience I've had playing that game, and that's part of the idea too. Is that by having an opening repertoire, we're playing similar moves, and you can learn from each experience. Granted, you need to analyze your games, which I've talked about before. It's very important to analyze your games, and then you gain experience in these types of openings. For example, I'm not sure if I've played this specific line exactly this way, but I'm very familiar both from this line in the Catalan, but also from playing the French defense, that I'm very comfortable playing these positions with this pawn wedge with d4 and 5. Um, and obviously, there's pros and cons to it. But the specific thing is that when you develop this opening repertoire, you're not just learning opening moves, you're also learning chess overall, chess strategy, chess tactics, and planning. All these things are part of developing the opening repertoire, which is why I recommend doing so. Okay, the next question is, well, if you buy into the fact that an opening repertoire is a good thing to have, how do you go about choosing one? And this is where it is a lot of different opinions. And I'm going to share two opinions with you from a couple people I've interviewed on Better Chess Training. And the first one is that of Grandmaster Nigel Davies. I've worked with him before, as he's been a coach of mine and a friend from a friend. And his view is to play solid openings, but not necessarily the sharpest, most, I guess you could say, most mainstream openings. And maybe I don't mean to overgeneralize his approach, but the idea would be not to necessarily play crazy openings. For example, G4, he doesn't have any, he's not recommending to play something like that, but not necessarily playing, the lines, the Najdorf, or some complicated opening that requires a lot of memorization. Because again, his primary goal is for you to learn chess, and that's kind of what I agree with as well with the opening repertoire. Now, as you get stronger, however, this brings about second individual would be international master Greg Shahad. He says if you are a strong player, and he's talking about masters and above, okay, 2200 and above, that you do need to play sharper, more mainstream lines in order to develop your chess. So they both have the same goal, okay, which is to help you to get better at chess. But maybe one approach is more applicable. Then there's other factors as well. How much time do you have to study chess? Um, and also how eventually, again, this video is geared more towards beginners, so you're developing all parts of your game, but eventually you'll start to develop your strengths. You know, are you good in very complicated tactical positions, or do you like maneuvering more? Do you like the end game more? So your opening repertoire is going to be based on that. Now, with all these things in mind, you can build this yourself by studying your moves, and I've done that in the past. And tell you the truth, my first opening repertoire, I just kind of cobbled together. I would play different moves, and then I would look on the internet to see what other people played or what people recommended. And then eventually I got to buying different books, and I'm going to show you a few of them here. And generally, I would recommend um, going studying a book written by strong players and making recommendations. Again, the idea is that you're not going to necessarily stick with these for the rest of your career, but of course they can be a part of your opening weapons over time. But so what would happen, and let me just give you some examples here with the chessboard. I started out playing e4 a lot, and so actually I'll kind of go through how I came about some of these things. And you know, a lot of my opponents would play e5 as well as things like c5, the Sicilian, and with e5, I would play knight to f3. And then if my opponent played the Petrov defense, which is very popular now due to our American chess star Fabiano Caruana, plays this a lot. I developed different responses, and I think I played d4 and a lot of lines there. I don't remember the exact lines. And against knight to c6, I actually developed, I believe it's called the max range attack, which goes like this here. And um, if here, I'm just kind of going through the lines I remember here. Memory is very interesting. And then here, I actually played knight takes f6, and then this was played, and a lot of tactics involved there. I won't go through the whole line. The point is not to necessarily teach you this opening, but to show you how I developed it. And from that, I actually got that from an article on the internet. Actually, the first I saw of that was from a book by Yasser Seirawan, Winning Chess Opening. So I first learned about this line from that book, and then over time I would look up on the internet max range attack and develop it from there, and I would store all the lines in my database. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to store and organize your opening repertoire a little later in this video. But the general idea, though, is that I kind of just cobbled it together, and I'll give you. For the black side of my repertoire, just a couple years ago, so I was rated around 1700 up to 1800, and I still play these occasionally, but I haven't been focusing on them. I'd have to refresh myself if I were to play it in a tournament. But I started playing, and let's use the board again so that that's just not me talking, um, against e4. I wanted to play e5, and partly from the advice of Nigel Davies in his book. And so this is before he became my coach. Uh, I started to play this and play the variations from there, and had a little bit of a success with it at my level. Um, but it basically covered all the positions. So instead of studying very specific variations like I did with this book, I had a book that covered everything after e4, e5. And similarly, on the other side of things, I played um, against d4 and even against c4. I would play the King's Indian. A few lines out here, kind of show you the King's Indian defense. And for that, I had this book, Starting Out the King's Indian by Joe Gallagher, which actually is a very good book. It's a little older now, though, but I had that book as well as a few. I did have some, I had a bunch of books on the King's Indian because Bobby Fischer, I was a fan of his. He played the King's Indian for part of his career. And of course, Garry Kasparov, who at the time was my favorite player. And I still like Garry Kasparov, but he played that a lot. So I had this book, and to cover every opening outside of E4 and D4, I had this book, Fighting the Anti-King's Tempo. So I just wanted to give you an example. Well, I guess I would look for books like that, so you don't have to buy like 20 different books. Partly because a lot of these books, for example, this book by Nigel Davies, he actually played a lot of these lines, so he coordinated his openings and kind of understood the ideas and was able to present them. Whereas before that, years before that, I kind of jumped around a lot with the opening repertoire. So anyways, this part of the video is getting a little long, so let me summarize that although you can build your own repertoire, kind of piece it together like I did, I would recommend using books. And now with Chessable, which I use quite a bit, there's a lot of ebooks as well that can that have these solutions. Okay, let's talk about some repertoire do's and don'ts. First off, I would recommend you look for sound openings. Okay, there's a lot of chess books out there with tricky openings, and some people say, well, under master level, every opening is sound, and to some extent that's true. But for white, for example, and this is not comprehensive, but this is just a few examples. I would pick E4 and D4 to start out with. Okay, I have this friend of mine. He loves to play H4 with white, and then against anything with he plays H5 with black. I would not recommend that. He actually does okay with it, but I wouldn't recommend it. So if you're watching this video, don't get offended. But E4 and D4 with white, for example, and then let's flip the board over. Against E4, I would play something like E5 or the French or the Caro-Kann or the Sicilian. Okay, maybe try to avoid openings. Well, this is a good opening too, but openings like the Nimzovich opening called. So because the lines there, and again, this one actually isn't that unsound, but you don't need, something like this is something you want to try to avoid, even though there might be repertoire books around that. I would avoid that. Okay, so play sound openings. Um, Next up, I would say, I would stick with an opening for a while. Okay, and I don't really want to give you a specific time frame. Actually, National Master Dan Heisman put it well. He said, stick with an opening until you feel that there's nothing more to learn from it. Okay, I guess I would add to that, if you really hate the types of positions you're getting from the opening, and every opening has tough positions or complicated positions, but if you're just not liking the nature of the positions you're getting, then maybe you can shop around. But make sure you've done enough work on it so that you've gotten, in terms of your chess education, you've gotten learned as much as you can. And let's see, I would next definitely organize your repertoire, and we'll talk a little bit more about that segment. But I like to use Chessable mainly. I have used databases in the past, but I mainly use Chessable in order to both organize the repertoire as well as memorizing the moves, which is the next tip, which is to definitely want to try memorizing your opening lines. Now, I would put a caveat to that. I wouldn't memorize it without some understanding, but we'll get to that in the repertoire don'ts. Okay, so repertoire don'ts, and again, some of these are just corollaries to what we've already talked about. Is maybe avoid playing wild or tricky openings. Openings that are based on specific opening traps. The reason why is that you will win games with those types of openings, but as you get better, uh, you'll find that your opposition will see past the tricks. Okay, um, I guess I'd rather have you start on a basis of a sound foundation that you can build upon and vary from. Whereas, playing a bunch of trick openings, then finding after you reach 1400 that they don't work anymore, or because basically what happens in those openings is if your opponent falls for the trick, you end up winning a piece or winning the game, and then if the trick or the gambit doesn't work, then you're just a pawn down for the rest of the game, which is not a fun way to play chess. And again, as your opponents get stronger, they will see past the tricks. So avoid the trick openings. Next up, I wouldn't jump around too much. Now, that being said, partly because I do these videos, I do try to play different openings, so I'm not playing exactly the same thing. But for my tournament games, I have a repertoire that I use, which you've seen a lot of in the videos, and I try to stick to that because there's still a lot to learn from those, and I'm very comfortable with them, and I play at a fairly high level. Uh, or I guess I can play. I can play. I can hold my own against very high-rated players. Well, they might outplay me um, in other parts of the game, but usually in the opening and middle game, I can hold my own. And I think you want to have that level of confidence in your opening repertoire, and you can't do that if you're jumping around too much. That being said, uh, again, over your career, you're going to change up your openings, and depending on your situation, as stronger players, if you're playing at a club where you're playing similar players, you might want to vary your openings. If you're playing in open tournaments, like here in the United States, we have um, where you're not necessarily going, especially if you're traveling for these tournaments, you're not going to see the same opponents in these tournaments. Then maybe sticking with a single repertoire for a while, and that's kind of what I've done is helpful. But I varied it a little bit because I'm doing a couple book coming up on better chess training, as well as just wanting to develop my own play in chess. So don't jump around too much. And finally, with the repertoire don'ts, don't memorize without some understanding. Now, when it comes to learning, some memorization, some of the moves that I play in my openings, I don't fully 100% understand yet. But each time you play it and each time you see how your opponent responds, you'll learn more about it. But I memorized the move using Chessable because I knew that that was the best move, okay? Or the correct move, I guess you could say. So you need to memorize the move, but you really want to make sure you're understanding them, okay? So I say not, you want to have some understanding, the general idea, even if a line in, a line from one of your books that tells you play this because of this. Now you may not fully grasp that, but you should still play the move because it's the best move to play, or at least according to the author or whoever you're trusting to help you select your opening repertoire. Okay, so those are some do's and don'ts. Okay, in this part of the video, I just wanted to show you how I organize my opening repertoire, and this is on Chessable. And I've talked about Chessable before, and I'm actually going to be doing a new updated review. I reviewed it a couple years ago, but it's actually improved quite a bit since then, and it is the only thing I use right now to organize my repertoire. Um, Whereas before I'd used other tools as well. But in any case, here's the this is the Repertoire Tree, and it's one aspect of Chessable. And let me just show you a few things about it. I've zoomed in on it so you can see it a little better on the video. But here, this is my repertoire, Brian's Repertoire 2018. And as you know, I often start with D4. And um, here I have planned lines against all of these openings. D5, knight to F6, F5. I'll just click on them so you can see. B5 even, I have responses against that. D6, E6, and B6, for example. So let's look at D5, which is probably the most common response here. And again, I played knight to F3. So you notice on my move, on the white move, I have one response. Okay, so and again, I'm developing other openings, but this is the repertoire I play in tournaments right now. I'll play knight to f3, and again, on the black side, obviously the black has a lot of responses. Knight to f6, for example, and bishop to f5, for example. So I have this all organized in Chessable, okay? And from there, let's just go a couple more lines just so you can see. Against e3, and again, I have several of the common responses, e6 and bishop to d3. So you see so the idea is that for all of those responses, I have my solution, I guess you could say. And over time that's developed, but right now, as you can see here, I started this repertoire in 2018. That is the repertoire I've developed. So I use Chessable to organize it there, and let me show you a little bit more. So this is the chapter for my white repertoire. This is the chapter view on Chessable, and I just wanted to show you a little bit more how that's organized. So each line I have is a separate item here in this chapter. What I showed you before was a repertoire tree, which shows you kind of a move by move of the different branches. But within each of these, and I'm just going to click on one here randomly. Actually, in this particular book, I don't have a lot of comments because I had studied this from another book, and but you could see here that all of these lines, and some of these lines I picked up from my opening books, and some of them I picked up from playing my games and then adding them after. So part of your organization will be how you add new moves into your repertoire, and that's from your games. You know, someone will play something, and you can look it up in the database and see how that works. So actually, let's take a look at that real quick as well in terms of organizing your repertoire. Okay, so what I just showed you was Chessable and how I organize it within the book that I create. This is actually chesstempo.com, and chesstempo I use for basic general games database as well as the tactics training. But since we're talking about the openings today, and I just want to show you what I do here. Let's say I go into those openings that into the Kali system, like I mentioned, and I'll just play through the first few moves. And let's see here. Let's just get to a position that here the normal. Well, let's take a look here. Here the normal move is to castle. Okay, but let's say our opponent plays queen to c7, and I haven't seen that before. I can look at this database, and these are master games, and I can see here that there's not many games with this opening, but d takes c5 is the most common move here. And so what I would do is, let's say, play through it just to take a look at it, and play. And you can see here, e4 is this pawn lever. This is actually part of my repertoire, or at least this aspect of it. And if he castles here, it actually transposes. So the idea here, and maybe that's not a great example, but the idea is that after you have your base repertoire, either from your books or from from your experience, and as you encounter new moves, you look it up in the book to see if your book has it, and if it doesn't, you can use tools here like Chess Tempo and databases to develop your opening repertoire. And then you go back, say to Chessable, like I would, and then once you have a line that you want to use and you understand the ideas from, you put it back into Chessable. So your repertoire is always being updated with new moves. Okay, and to kind of finish up this video, I created a little workflow. This is how I study my openings. And first, of course, I will create my repertoire and study lines. And of course, this could be from a book or ebook or videos. And the idea is not just to memorize the first 5 to 10 moves or whatnot, but to actually study master games in those lines and make sure you're understanding the underlying strategy behind them. So that would be the first step. The second one is to get experience playing your opening repertoire in your games. Okay, so that's the very important experience to play moves, and because a lot of times when you make mistakes, that's how you learn. And when your opponent makes mistakes, you understand why certain moves are played and why they're the main lines of your opening repertoire. Next, whenever you encounter a new idea, for example, if you are playing somebody and they play a move you've never seen and it ends up being a sound move, you want to look this up. And again, I showed you how I do that on Chess Tempo. Then with those moves, you want to make sure you're updating your repertoire. And it's very easy to do, or fairly easy to do on Chessable, and that's what I use. But there are other good tools out there. So as much as I enjoy Chessable, if you're already using, for example, a chess opening wizard or a chess position trainer, those are also very good tools that I have used in the past. Make sure you're updating your repertoire. And then you want to make sure you're reviewing your lines occasionally because our memories are fallible and sometimes we will forget things. And Chessable makes it very easy to do that. And again, I mentioned Chessable a couple times. I will be doing a more full review in the coming weeks, but and then I'll put a link in the description when that happens. But this is a general workflow, and the specific tools you use, of course, is up to you. But these are the steps that you would do to create and play and maintain your opening repertoire. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button and let me know what you thought in the comments, especially if you had any questions that I could help clarify. Also, if you are new to this channel, Better Chess Training is about helping you improve your chess. So consider subscribing so that you can get notified about future videos. Finally, I want to do a quick thank you to my patrons. Thank you for your support. If you're interested in checking out patronage, you can look at the link, my Patreon page in the description below. But thank you for watching and looking forward to seeing you in the next video.